Welcome to the Four Worlds podcast from Tomorrow's World Today. We're diving into the latest in tech, science, and sustainability, from nature's mysteries in the world of inspiration to the hands-on crafts of creation, the bold breakthroughs of innovation, and the scaled-up wonders of production. This is your ticket to the stories shaping tomorrow. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Four Worlds podcast. Today, we're talking about sustainability in the shoe industry. Joining us for that is Galahad Clark, one of the co-founders at Vivobarefoot. Galahad, I appreciate your time, especially all the way over in the UK. How are you?
Wonderful to be here and connected to Pittsburgh from sunny Somerset. We're just, finishing our summer holidays here. I know all you lot have been back to school already for 10 days or so, but we don't go back to school here until September. So I'm just counting down the days that my kids go back to school on Monday and the real holidays start then.
Right. I think the biggest thing a part of that, you said the sunny Somerset, it's sunny here in Pittsburgh. So two rarities, I think, to start off the podcast.
Correct.
All right, Galahad, let's get into it. For people who don't know who Vivobarefoot is and what they do, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and just give the audience a little bit of insight of what you do and what exactly your product is.
So Vivobarefoot literally means live barefoot. And so the company pretty much does what it says on the tin, where we enable people to live barefoot in no matter what they're doing, how they're doing it, where they're doing it. We're a footwear company. So we make footwear, but we make footwear that is as close to barefoot as possible. And we make a whole wide range of footwear from kids to adults, from hiking to gym to everyday lifestyle shoes. So no matter kind of what you're doing, how you're doing it, you can always experience that in pure barefoot bliss with Vivobarefoot.
And we will dive deep into this, but I mentioned bringing sustainability to the footwear industry. Give a little bit of background, how exactly you do that and how you're able to basically make a product that feels like you're barefoot.
Yeah, so I come from a long line of shoemakers, 7 generations of shoemakers. Wow. Funny enough, in about 3 weeks' time, we're celebrating the 200-year anniversary of our family making shoes in Somerset. And actually, the very first shoe they ever made in 1825 was a pretty good barefoot sheepskin slipper.
Wow.
So in many ways, what we're doing now is kind of just returning back to the beginning. But from a sustainability, so I was kind of in the shoe industry. I was born into the shoe industry, and for one reason or another, I then ended up in the shoe industry after university. Desperately didn't want to go into the shoe industry in many ways, but I was actually studying in America, and it was in America that I got dragged into the shoe industry via a long story to do with the Wu-Tang Clan. But it was a time when sustainability and design was a much more important topic than probably sadly it is today in many ways.
Sure.
And there's an American professor called John Ehrenfeld who wrote a book called Sustainability. And he wrote in that book that the only excuse for making more products and filling the world up with more stuff is that a product should help us connect more with nature, make us feel more human, improve the human condition, ask important environmental or ethical questions. And I was already aware of barefoot shoes at this time, and we'd already sort of started playing around with making barefoot prototypes and things and the concept of barefoot. But I realized that the only shoes that actually connect humans more to nature and actually have a sort of positive impact on human health were barefoot shoes. So in many ways, I came to barefoot through sustainability thinking. So, my starting point was the most sustainable shoes in the world are barefoot shoes by definition. And, in many ways, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms, and everybody has slightly different definitions of what sustainability is. But I like John Ehrenfeld, and he said, that all of life on Earth should be able to flourish. And that for me is flourishing is a great word and a great definition of sustainability. And it was through his work and through his thinking that actually, I came to realize that the most sustainable shoemaking in the world is barefoot shoemaking.
And you say that his definition of sustainability inspired you to do what you do now. What's your definition of sustainability after being in this industry for so long and creating this product?
Well, it's funny because the sustainability in many ways got sort of replaced by regenerative, and there's all these buzzwords in this
Yep.
world that some people say restorative, and like if you were to imagine like a spectrum, and the shoe industry is genuinely one of the least sustainable industries in the world on many levels. It's a devastating industry for both planetary and human health. It's fundamentally a subtractive industry where it's taking, resources from the earth and then also, frankly, taking health from humans, both in the polluting activities, in the making and distributing of shoes, but then also literally in the impact it has on the user of most of what I call big shoes.
Right.
And then, if you go from subtractive and you go up the spectrum, arguably sustainability is just sort of net zero. It's sort of not positive, not negative. It's sustainable. And then you might get to restorative, which is maybe net positive, where you're doing more good than you are doing harm. But then I like the definition of regenerative, which means, where you're actually aligning to living systems, you're actually aligning to nature, and you're following nature's wisdoms rather than kind of imposing oneself on nature. A lot of sustainability thinking and rhetoric out there is about humans saving the world and, saving nature. But obviously the world is going to be more than fine without humans. In fact, it would do a lot better without humans. So the best things humans can do to save themselves is just align themselves and ultimately follow nature and natural systems, rather than the other way around.
Right. And to that point, believing that conventional shoes, harm both our bodies and the environment. When did you first realize that, and how did that steer your vision?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be shocked how few people in the shoe industry genuinely understand human biomechanics, the way the body moves and the forces on those bodies, anatomy of the foot, and the way the foot is designed and supposed to function. You hear so many times in the shoe industry, veterans of the shoe industry, when you sort of say, well, why do you do it like that? Well, why? And in the end they go, well, but that's just the way we've always done it. And it feels that way in a lot of industries. And so I was lucky enough, I think, by happenstance, to a childhood friend of mine who was really into postural alignment therapy. He kept on getting injured as a tennis player, and his father was an Alexander technique teacher. And Alexander technique is all about aligning your posture. It's used a lot by actors and musicians and also sports people. And he realized that trainers, anything with a heel and anything that was constricting his foot was actually, making postural alignment very difficult. He was a student at the Royal College. He was a sort of designer and innovator. And to cut a long story short, he got a pair of Nike shoes. He sliced off the sole of the shoes and stitched a tennis racket cover on the bottom. And so made, what looked like a kind of cool pair of Nike shoes, but with none of the underfoot technology, and made it a bit wider. And he brought it to me and just said, look, this is the way shoes should be made. And I instinctively loved the idea. And then So the education then started with him and started with postural alignment thinking. And then there was a guy called Lee Saxby who had been studying with a guy called Dr. Romanoff, who's based in America, based in, I think, Florida. And he was then also influencing a guy called Dan Lieberman at Harvard University in the evolutionary biology lab. So there were, and then Chris McDougall kind of pulled together a lot of these stories in the seminal book Born to Run, which came out in about 2009-10, I think. And so there's this confluence of educators and science and practitioners that suddenly all, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by, and frankly, to be able to study with them and learn from them. And so that is what, in many ways kind of has started what I call the first barefoot revolution. And Vibram Five Fingers were kind of at the heart of all of that. And that all happened around that time, 2010, 2011. And as I started to learn more and more about it, and as I started to wear barefoot shoes more and more, the circles of theory and practice got bigger and bigger, and one thing led to another. And in 2012, we dropped everything else we were doing, and we were involved in some other shoe businesses. That's my cousin and I, Asher, and just kind of went all in on barefoot shoes because we sort of realized that this is really the only way to make not only sustainable shoes, but the only way to make shoes that actually have any chance of being regenerative or be positive for people and planet.
Yeah, and a big part of that is the process of 3D printing this footwear. At what point did you see that potential, just reimagining footwear design in production through 3D printing?
So 3D printing was being used in the shoe industry quite a lot for prototyping and just quickly imagining new shoes.
Right.
And so, and then off the back of that, obviously people were kind of, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could 3D print shoes? So that was a sort of idea that was bubbling around in the shoe industry anyway, to some degree. But through Barefoot, and one of the other avenues that the Barefoot Adventures opened up was, we realized not only is sustainable shoemaking barefoot shoemaking, but actually all indigenous shoemaking is barefoot shoemaking. And when I say indigenous shoemaking, I just mean people, who effectively living pre, let's say, agricultural revolutionary times, no matter where they are in the world. So humans made footwear because our feet are very sensitive and they have lots of nerve endings. And so when we started to do the running, hunting in Africa, we made sandals as one of the first tools that Homo sapiens, the tool maker, ever made. And of course, they were perfect barefoot sandals. And they enabled the early humans to be able to run down an antelope for 8 hours across the hot, baked plains of the African savanna with lots of camel thorns. And, we needed those sandals to protect us from the heat and from the puncture protection from the sharp thorns in Africa. And then as that small group of humans left Africa and started to cross the mountains and cross the deserts, and we made shoes wherever we went, but we made shoes person by person, foot by foot from the local animal skins. So, the first peoples in Europe and America would have made bison skin moccasins and deer skin moccasins. The first peoples up in the Arctic made reindeer skin moccasins. In the subcontinent, it was buffalo sandals. The people that lived in the jungles and the forests made woven shoes out of different plants. They used lactahevia rubber, and made the early molded shoes. And all those shoes were perfect barefoot shoes, and they were all made person by person, foot by foot, from the local relevant sustainable materials, if to use that slightly awful word again. And what we realized with 3D printing was, you could go back to a shoe industry where, you only made shoes person by person, foot by foot again, rather than in these big Asian subtractive supply chains where big factories are doing cookie cutter shoes in, not that many different sizes, maybe 10, 12 adult sizes across men's and women's, only 5 or 6 sizes in each gender. And, by definition, those cookie cutter shoes will not fit most people because the variety of foot shape is such that, when you cookie cut a size, then and you force all of the size 10s into size 10, by definition, only about 30% of people that are size 10 actually fit a size 10.
Right. That's when you see all these different brands. Oh, I'm 9.5 in so-and-so brand, but I'm a 10 in this brand. It's all over the place, and I couldn't agree more.
And the reason is because feet are all over the place. The width of people's feet, the arch height, bridge height, all the volumes, all the shapes, very, very different. And so what we quickly realized was that 3D printing gives us the opportunity to get away from mass manufactured shoes that don't fit people and are fundamentally unsustainable on many levels. And they literally deform people's feet. Most people in the West wearing those cookie cutter shoes have deformed, weak feet because of the shoes.
Yeah,
And so 3D printing gives the opportunity to go back to actually making shoes for people that really fit and allow the foot to be strong, natural, and healthy.
Yeah.
And if you've got a strong, natural, healthy foot, the rest of your body works tremendously better. If you've got a weak, deformed foot, you pay for that up the kinetic chain. You pay for it in your knees and your hips and your back, and so 3D printing became, so we obviously do make shoes as Vivobarefoot in those long supply chains, and we do make sized shoes. So ours are relatively better because they're relatively wider and they're relatively more flexible. But we realized that the ultimate expression of our mission, which is to reconnect people with nature, starting with their feet and reconnect with their natural potential, would be to actually be able to make shoes person by person, foot by foot again, the same way all humans had footwear made for the first 90,000 years of existence.
Exactly. Yeah, just make
Not existence, but like of people running around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely understand what you mean. And taking all of that into consideration, wanting to get back to making shoes person by person, you have that inspiration, you have that idea. And then when you start that creation process for these shoes and for the footwear, what were some of those challenges and some of those setbacks as you got into that creation process?
Well, it's interesting because, like we said in the beginning, when you start asking people in the footwear industry, why are you doing like this? Why are you doing it like that? Why? And you start saying, well, you don't, any kind of heel is throwing off natural postural alignment. Any kind of height restrictive shape is not allowing the foot to splay and contract as it might do. Any arch support is ultimately weakening the arch because it's acting like a splint. Any kind of toe spring is rendering the big toe, the great toe, ineffective. Why do toddlers' shoes look like feet, and why do 6-year-old shoes look like bananas? and the answer was always like, well, it's just the way we've always done it. And so when we started saying, well, actually, there's a different way, and all this padding and all this support and structures, and the footwear industry is full of all this kind of underfoot technology. You must have a shank, which is a stiff supportive structure between the forefoot and the rear foot. You must have arch support. You must have toe spring, et cetera. And the shapes are all kind of ingrained in fashion culture. So we had huge challenges and we were young, obviously, and naive. And so the experienced owners and experts in the footwear industry kept on telling us we were wrong. So aside from just all those obvious challenges of saying, well, we don't believe in any of these bogus rules that the footwear industry has set up, actually when it came to making shoes that are fundamentally a lot thinner, softer, more flexible than normal shoes, it's relatively easy to make a thick, stiff thing compared to a soft, floppy thing.
Sure.
Especially when and the problem with footwear is you're sticking a sole, which needs to be abrasion resistant and durable and long lasting, to an upper, which needs to be soft and flexible and comfortable. So you sort of got two competing forces of materials fundamentally. And then if you increase the flexibility and you increase the wear and you reduce all the thicknesses and increase the softness, you get a big shoemaking challenge, basically. So they look like simple shoes to make, but in reality, they're much harder to make. So that, the softer a shoe is, the harder it is to make.
And when you're doing all of that, keeping all of that in mind, you're finally making and producing this shoe. You're using some materials that fit that sustainable definition. What are those materials that you're using to 3D print these shoes? How does that work? Some that's biodegradable. How do you manage to pull that off?
Well, I mean, pulling it off is would be an incorrect thing to say. We're still on the journey of trying to figure it out.
Right. And more in that prototype. Yeah.
So the starting point is that the world makes 24 billion pairs of shoes every year, and nearly every single one of those shoes is made with polluting materials. So nearly all the foams and plastics come from the petrochemical industry. Nearly all the leather is tanned with heavy metals, which is terribly carcinogenic. All the glues and the threads and various bits of hardware that you find in footwear. Also, terribly polluting. All the waterproof microplastic type treatments are all problematic, and nearly all shoes, like we said, don't really fit humans. And then they nearly all end up in landfill, which is kind of the elephant in the room, that there's no real end-of-life solution in the footwear industry.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies have started to offer solutions, and it's becoming more of a thing. So the starting point is horrific. So you and we make a wide variety of shoes. So when you start, let's say, with leather, so rather than the worst case scenario, and actually, a lot of the big shoe industry got into trouble where the leather is a byproduct of the agricultural industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say a lot of the cattle industry now has been found guilty of chopping down Amazon rainforest to build big cattle farms, and then using loads of bloody hormones and drugs to rear the cattle. And then the shoe industry uses the leather from those cattle farms and the big agriculture. So that's the problem. So what's the solution? So can we find leather from small, sustainable farmers who are not sort of using lots of terrible drugs and cutting down virgin rainforest to raise their animals? And so what we call wild hide. And so we source the leather very specifically from small holding farmers, that the animals live a decent life, and that the skins are a bit more irregular and they've got a bit more markings on them because the animals are allowed to roam around in nature, etc. So that's like one example of maybe 50 examples of taking an existing material in the shoe industry and finding an alternative.
Exactly.
And that's with the cottons and the hemp, and then the foams, and and then all of the chemical rubbers to the actual natural rubbers, and look, there's lots of wonderful innovation happening all across the piece, and going from petrochemical plastics to plant-based plastics, and so on and so forth. And it's the average shoe company, let's say, of any kind of size, and we make nearly 2 million pairs of shoes a year, and we use literally nearly 1,000 components across all the shoes we make. And we're a relatively small shoe company in the grand scheme of things. So when you get up to the likes of Nike, it will be probably 10,000 different components and suppliers. So there is a lot of sustainable innovation happening in the material supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to, you almost just got to pick them off one by one, bit by bit. And the trade-off between something that's proven, long-lasting, durable, fantastic abrasion resistance to something that is natural and biodegradable, by definition, that's a tough trade-off.
There's a lot of elements that go into finding a circular life cycle for shoes. It's something that maybe people don't think about. And tell me about your approach, and speak a little bit about the BioSurf Flex material, how all of that is just kind of helping you work towards maybe that circular lifestyle for footwear.
So two approaches: natural and what we call polycircular. And there's biodegradable, so from nature back to nature, using natural materials that can genuinely be biodegraded. One approach. And then the other approach is polycircular, shoes that are ultimately made from synthetic materials, ideally coming from plant sources rather than petrochemical sources, that can then be genuinely recycled. So we work on those two strategies effectively, and both ultimately trying to be circular. The obvious challenge with natural, like we just said, is durability, and especially in performance shoes, and weight and water wicking and things. Although obviously, as we go, materials like wool, that there is no synthetic material in the world that comes close to the amazing qualities of wool, for example. And frankly, the same for leather. And then on the polycircular side, and the material you mentioned is a plastic that can ultimately be truly recycled in a chemical recycling way. But and actually, there's a number of the big shoe companies are trying to figure this out.
Right.
It's proving to be tremendously more difficult than anybody kind of imagined 5 years ago, because the problem is in the wear, in heat, the the plastics keep slightly altering.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you come to take back the shoes, what maybe started off as a pure set of polymers that in theory could then be recycled back into that pure set of polymers, they've slightly altered
Mm-hmm.
in the making, in the treatment, in the wearing. When the glue then meets the two different polymers, that then sets off another little chemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so the challenge of being able to genuinely recycle what becomes impure set of
Exactly.
polymers to get it back to the same grade as plastic is really difficult. At the moment, all recycling is basically downcycling. So you're taking a fleece and it turns into, a rubbish bin and then turns into a playground. But to get a plastic bottle that truly can go back to being a plastic bottle is something that's, where literally billions of dollars are being spent on trying to figure that out. And it's not just the actual chemistry of being able to get it back to food grade plastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the cultural systems and the societal systems to get people to actually engage in the recycling schemes. And I think glass bottles, for example, which you think is the simplest thing to recycle in the world, and that it's something like only 25 or 30% of glass bottles actually get recycled.
Wow.
Whereas glass is, in theory, a perfectly circular material.
Right.
But, the big problem the glass industry has is just getting people to bloody well send the glass back.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. How many communities just don't even offer recycling or make recycling extremely difficult? I've lived in places where instead of putting out a recycling bin, you have to take it to a site. And let's be honest, what percentage of people are taking their time out of their day? It's true. It really is.
A minority.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a very small amount. So getting there and just talking about making an unpure polymer back into pure plastic is, from my writing and from some of the stories that I have done, has been one of the biggest challenge of trying to find a circular plastic or a plastic that is truly recyclable. So,
and as you know, right, there's a huge amount of investment. There's wonderful companies like really trying really hard, multiple big companies all over the world investing a lot of time, money, and effort into trying to figure this out. And if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said, yeah, we're 5 years away from this thing being nailed.
Yeah.
10 years later, it kind of feels like we're still at stage one.
Right. It's one of those things that just always feels like it's 5 years away. That's a great point. Like right now, 10 years ago, you thought it. Right now, you think like, okay, we're 5 years away. We'll figure it out at some point. So, it's all really good points. And one of the, kind of switching it up a little bit here, one of the things that we were interested in is your Vivobiome system. Just tell the audience a little bit about that, how you meld AI, mobile scanning, and local 3D printing into building a custom circular product.
Yeah, so Vivobiome is the epitome of the Vivo mission. It's sort of the ultimate future of the way we love to see the shoe industry go to. We mentioned it earlier. It's ultimately going back to humans being able to make personalized shoes for themselves, person by person, foot by foot again. So using modern technology, and in reality, obviously, we're not going to go back to a world where we all go to the local cobbler and stand on a bison skin and they carefully measure around the skin and make a beautiful pair of moccasins to our preferences with our tribal colors kind of stitched into the uppers and some nice beading around the, but I guess that might happen more and more. But in lieu of that, like what everybody does now is they walk around effectively with a scanning technology in their pocket. And so it's not perfect yet. And not all new phones have it, but basically before long, mobile phones will be able to pretty accurately scan your feet. So with a scan, we can take that scan and then we can create, and with, various algorithms and AI learning, we can take that scan and then create a framework for you to then be able to interact with a digital program to choose the type of footwear you'd like. You can personalize it to, do you want more grip, less grip? Do you want, your girlfriend's name printed on the bottom? Do you want a picture of your favorite comic book hero printed down the side? You can kind of do anything, right? And And then, so, as I said earlier, there's one thing being able to print one layer in one material, but obviously a lot of footwear needs two different densities, one for the sole and one for the upper. And as you can imagine, there's lots of exciting 3D printing technologies that are figuring out both options. So at the moment, we can do really good sandals, we can do really good water shoes, and we can do soles that we then can stick onto a sock that we call what we call hybrid, but still ultimately sort of personalized and bespoke to the user. So, our vision is that before long, the days of just going and buying cookie cutter shoes that don't fit you will be over. And when people start experiencing shoes that truly fit them, truly allow their feet to be strong, natural, and healthy and connected to the earth, and they can pretty much choose, whatever style they want, and it be quite unique to them. Is where we think it will go. And again, with 3D printing, I think 10 years ago, people were kind of going, in 5 years' time, everything's going to be 3D printed. 10 years later, it's going rather slower than people thought, right? And now we're saying 5 years' time, everything's going to be.
It's kind of the same argument. It's always that 5 years down the road. And to that point, how do you foresee, let's say, AI and mobile scanning transforming both, like you mentioned, the personalization and sustainability of footwear? You touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear your personal. You're doing it every day. So where do you see that kind of happening down the line?
More and more companies are joining the market. More and more human ingenuity is going into figuring out the 3D scanners. More and more human ingenuity figuring out the polymers, especially the sustainable biodegradable polymers. Amazing companies really figuring out plant-based biodegradable polymers that, kind of, because obviously, we don't want to just fill the world up with more microplastics in what is an exciting technology that will improve health and function, but there's kind of no point if it's totally toxic. So, we see that happening all over the world, and we're not quite at Moore's law in terms of 3D printing and scanning yet, but like I said, the phones, the technology is in some phones now. It will soon be in all phones. It's slightly imprecise now. It will get more precise, and that is pretty essential to the whole thing really working for everybody. So right now, we need physical offline scanners to be able to get it precise enough to really make a perfect pair of bespoke shoes for you. The phone can get us pretty close, but that will improve. We see in the polymers, we just saw a new innovation literally in the last month of a very lightweight foamed 3D printed material that also has biodegradable qualities that just provides a kind of softness and a flexibility and comfort that has never been seen before in 3D printing, and so on and so forth, right? And then being able to 3D print the upper materials and make them soft and breathable and flexible enough, but also weather resistant. All the pieces are starting to come together. The lovely thing about, at least from our point of view, this whole thing about underfoot technology and funny shapes in the footwear industry is a kind of modern phenomenon. And what 3D printing will allow us to is go back to making shoes that are genuinely for your feet, that that feel absolutely. There's nothing better than walking barefoot. I think there are a few people that say they prefer shoes, but I think there's not many kids that start off, and those are mainly adults that are just used to wearing shoes, and their feet have gotten weak and they can't be bothered to do the transition back to strong, healthy feet. But there's not many kids in the world that don't prefer to run around barefoot. And
you're right.
And as long as you allow it, you never deform and weaken a kid's foot. That sort of starting point will always be there.
Right.
So humans are walking around in pointy-heeled shoes because of horse riding. Right. We made pointy-heeled shoes to go into stirrups for horse riding and being able to fight each other on horses. To have a horse was a high-status aristocratic thing. So to have horse riding shoes was a high-status thing to have. So everybody wanted to have high-status heel pointy shoes. But we're kind of over fighting each other on horses now. And in
I
the
think so.
21st century, just and actually, what happened with Nike was they started off making really good barefoot shoes, but they got in a bunch of. But when everyone started running in their flat barefoot shoes, people were getting injured, and the doctors came in and said, "Well, if you want to make shoes that people can immediately kind of go running in, you need to make them like their work shoes. So you need to make them pointy and heeled." So Nike put in the heel stack with all the bloody air bubbles and started to make the toes more pointy and raised. And so, they made their shoes like people's feet were because of the shoes. So all the new technology in the shoe industry is there to solve the problems caused by shoes themselves. So it's a terrible shoe matrix. And, our job, and like in so many other industries, and it's the same for the food industry, I think, same in some ways for the medical industry, we're just sort of unraveling and just getting back to basic natural principles in the 21st century. We're using some modern technologies to enable that journey back in urban environments, etc. But what we're just enabling is just getting back to that natural state of natural health.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's clear there's a lot of technological advances in your work in your industry, but there's also some setbacks in that innovation process. Let's kind of gear towards the production process, because it's kind of the same thing. Being able to produce locally and on demand via your micro factories, it challenges some traditional supply chains. What successes and what setbacks have you experienced so far with how your production process looks?
Well, I mean, the success is we have successfully made 3D printed shoes that people love to wear. And in very simple terms, the failure is we have not managed to scale that yet. And so we're doing it in the hundreds of pairs at the moment. We think in the next year it's going to go into the thousands, and then, but, like we said, the world makes 24 billion pairs of shoes every year. Vivo makes close to 2 million pairs a year. Nike makes, hundreds of millions of pairs a year. And so, the challenge is scalability.
Right.
The cost is still quite high. Like I said, but the accuracy with the mobile scanning is still too low. Some of the polymers and materials up until now have been too stiff and too brittle and probably do have a little bit of a microplastics problem. So, we do now think we have a system where we can scan your foot and we can make a bespoke pair of shoes for you. And at the moment, it's mainly sandals and water shoes or a sole that's stuck onto an upper. It's relatively slow and relatively expensive still, but we can do it. And so the next phase is to figure out how to genuinely scale that.
Right. And are there what sort of infrastructure or partnerships? I mean, you said you go from hundreds to next year it's looking like thousands. What kind of infrastructure or partnerships have been most essential to delivering these custom footwear, trying to get that to scale? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Scanning technology.
Of course.
Printing technology.
Of course.
Polymer science. That to some degree, where you do want to stick a sole onto an upper, then it's the technology to be able to do that without a big long Asian supply chain. Right. So we're investing quite a lot in RoboCell technology to be able to automate that process of sticking a sole onto an upper, especially where it's very variable. We're working with some exciting companies that are figuring out how to do that with natural materials. And 3D printing can also be used to make molds. So rather than using big, heavy industrial metal molds, you can 3D print bespoke shapes and then put sort of vacuum plastic on it, and then make the shoe sole out of natural material poured into the plastic mold. So there's lots of kind of exciting spin-offs, as it were, shall we say, of the new ways of making shoes in more efficient ways, but being able to make shoes person by person, foot by foot in a larger scale is the challenge, but it ultimately will be local. Like, we're not trying to make a big global solution here. We're trying to make a local solution.
Yeah.
But even on a local level, I live in a relatively unpopulated part of the UK, but there's still sort of 20 million people that live in the Southwest here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you have to think about it like this. It all has to start somewhere. And, if it's small now, you got to look to the future. And looking to the future, what are you most excited about? Where do you see the future of Vivobarefoot going and all that stuff?
We live in a doomsday world, right, where people are predicting that, the robots are going to take over any day now. And humans are basically not going to have anything to do. And, at best, we're going to have 10 years of, hyper challenge, meta crises all over the world. And we might come out the other side sort of with universal basic income and everybody living, wonderful lives of leisure and joy. Now, I do believe that there's a chance that this new super intelligence that is being created will also, perhaps re-educate humans on that nature is infinitely more intelligent than anything that artificial intelligence will ever be. And if artificial intelligence is genuinely intelligent, it will respect that and understand that, and it will teach humans that. And it will teach humans that in order for humans to be happy, actually rebalancing and aligning ourselves to nature will ultimately make us happier and living in small communities, eating natural food. And I believe that when you wear barefoot shoes or less shoes and you put your feet on the earth, you psychologically can't help but believe that is the right path for humans to take to then go back to living in local communities and living in local food systems and rejecting sort of, being just part of a giant global corporatism that is making so many people unhappy and disenfranchised, and where the robots will take over and humans will just serve the robots. But actually regaining our sovereignty is about sort of regaining our responsibility for our own health. And, in our case, that starts with putting your feet on the ground,
right,
feeling the earth's energies, feeling your own health and your own natural potential. And you can't do that in big, padded, uncomfortable shoes that literally disconnect you from nature.
Yep.
Like big shoe literally disconnects us. And so when you're disconnected from something, you can treat it badly and you don't care about it. But when you feel something and you're grounded to something and you treat it with more respect and you enjoy it more.
Yeah.
And so, contribution to what I think not many people disagree with now, to this, realigning to the natural world, we'll be surrounded by godlike technology, no doubt about it. But in the end, more and more people are obviously understanding that the real happiness comes from being in communities close to nature, eating healthy food. And, our contribution to that transition is getting people out of big, padded, deforming shoes that is ruining their health and disconnecting themselves from the very thing that's going to save us.
Yeah, get your feet back on the ground, folks. We'll kind of wrap it there on a pretty positive note. One last thing: how can people follow this journey and follow Vivobarefoot and stay connected?
Well, if we're anything, we're total hypocrites. And the definition of the hypocrite is the shoemaker that goes around barefoot. And, we live in a world of oxymorons: barefoot shoes,
right?
Ethical business, eco fashion. They're all great oxymorons of our time. And obviously one of the other great oxymorons is healthy digital. So, of course, we're basically, we're more than anything a digital business, and we communicate connecting with nature through using digital tools.
Sure.
And so hypocritically, unfortunately, the best way to connect with us is digitally. And there's, obviously websites and social channels around Vivobarefoot. But, and actually it's one of the things we're interested in. How do we use technology in some ways to encourage people that, you can only buy this pair of shoes if you actually walk up to the top of your local hill.
Right.
And you can, that will give you access to whatever. But obviously that's one of the great challenges, is how to live healthy digital. And obviously we're staring at each other through screens.
Yeah, through screen. And hey, there's plenty of benefits to technology as well. I mean, we wouldn't be able to talk otherwise
do this.
and
Exactly.
see each other. Yeah. So that's a really great point. Galahad, I really appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you telling us your story. Thanks again for hopping on with us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much for giving us the space, and I really wish you very well.
All right, Galahad, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. That's all the time we have today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Four Worlds Podcast. Until next time, you can catch up on the latest innovations shaping our world at tomorrowsworldtoday.com, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.